Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Path and Bounds Creative Office Hour. My name is Stella Guan. I'm the founder and CEO. And today we have a really interesting guest. His name is Samuel Kang. He is based in San Francisco and he is truly a multi hyphenated creative. He is a graphic designer, an illustrator, a creative coder, a UX designer, and a painter. So he does many, many things. And we're really excited to speak to him today to learn about his career. Hi,
Hi,
Samuel.
thanks for
Welcome.
having me. Hi, thanks for
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So, you currently work as a UX designer at Microsoft, and you just, I believe you graduated a couple of years ago. So, you're essentially still pretty early on in your career. So, I was just really curious because you do so many different things. You paint, you code, you design. What inspired you to study all of those skills, and how do you see yourself using them for your
Yes,
career?
that's an excellent question, and it kind of involves like multiple uh, disciplines that just kind of came through in my life that involved me going to art school. So as long as I could remember, I always liked drawing, and whenever people ask me like, "Oh, what inspires you?" I like would not be able to articulate it because it's something that I feel very innately towards, like just drawing and creating. That like it just feels very natural and something that I feel a lot of joy in. So I kind of understood that like that's something that I wanted to pursue. So I went to art school initially to do advertising and production work for graphic design and any advertising for clients. And I was specifically actually interested in the makeup world, cosmetology. So during my third year or second year of college, I interned at CoverGirl through an agency. So I got to do a lot of production work for, in-store walls and graphics. And I fell in love with graphic design there, and decided to kind of pursue that as a route. And then I actually got to take a coding class as an elective in Maryland Institute College of the Arts, where I attended school. And I also fell in love with the fact that like I could just start creating, without any mediums that are like pre-made by somebody. So like Adobe Illustrator to even like Figma, and even like Paint itself, it is touched by someone pretty much. And then like with Creative Code, I could either take an existing library that someone has made, so like very much like any software that you use, or I could go really bare bone and start creating something from complete scratch. So I really like the freedom there. And I got in touch with the recruiter at Creative Lab through a career fair my junior year of college. And she suggested that because I liked coding, I should try out, UX design. And so I never even heard of UX design at that point. So I did my research and I got really intrigued by it because it meant that like one, I would be doing a lot of the front facing UI design, and it also involves working with engineers, which I've always wanted to do. So I, just kind of read a lot of articles that I could find online and did self-initiated projects to get myself an internship at an agency that does UI UX for various clients. And from there, I just after graduating, I went into the Bay Area again to start, pursuing this UI UX career.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So you basically, follow your passion and then you're open to experimenting with a lot of different things without restricting yourself first. And I think that's something that's really valuable because you don't want to decide on something until you've tried it out. And you also want to, take up opportunities that come your way and just, provide the best that you can. That's really interesting because when the recruiter suggested UX design to you as a potential path, right? That when you mentioned that, um, I think a lot of people they think that UX designers have to code. Sometimes they don't, but it's really important to know the basics to communicate with engineers and developers so you don't so you don't end up speaking two different languages. So my next question, actually, speaking of coding, right? Because you have some knowledge in it and you're also a designer, how important do you think it is for designers to learn coding? Do you think it's necessary, or do you think it's more of a good to have?
I think it depends on how you want to identify yourself as a designer and like how you want to work. I think it's a both nice to have and it's like you should have kind of thing. So I think at the bare minimum you should know a couple like limit and restrictions of like what engineers can and can't do. I think you need to just know that on a high abstract level. So that doesn't require you to learn coding, but it requires you to know, certain things, certain semantics, certain things that you shouldn't do, like don't make UIs with like very complicated like decorations and user interfaces. I can go on and on about that, but like that, you don't really need to learn how to code, but you certainly know that engineering would be very difficult. So I think subtle nuances like that you should know, but beyond that is kind of up to you. I chose to learn how to code just because I found a lot of personal joy in it, but I also recognized that it meant that I could talk to developers more. And by no means am I saying that like I'm on par with like an engineer. Like an engineer would write code far cleaner and far better than me. But at least like when I'm doing a handoff, I can use certain terminology, or if I'm doing like responsive design, I can tell the engineers like certain CSS properties instead of just trying to design each and every mockup, and that saves a lot of time. Or especially with like the tools that I use, which is Figma, there's not a lot of like animation transitions you could do, or like adding event listeners, which would require JavaScript. So by just adding like even just pseudocode, which means like just how the code is supposed to behave, I think that has done a lot and has been very helpful for me to communicate with the developers. Um, so I think it's a both nice to have and you should know kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It sounds contradictory, but I 100% agree as a designer myself, because I can't imagine, not knowing anything about code. When you talk to engineers, you'll really not be helping them, right? Because they'll have to teach you everything and it'll slow down the workflow. So definitely agree on it's not, something that should deter you from pursuing a career in this field if you feel like, oh, my code is so complicated. But at the very least, you should be well versed in it. You don't need to be at the level of a software developer, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about your career, trajectory from being a student and graduating, a couple of years ago, and landing a lot of different roles at major big companies. So I think it's pretty impressive, and a lot of our listeners, audience, they're trying to get a foot in the door, right? Right out of school. So, what is your advice for people who are trying to break into the industry? What should they do?
Yeah. I think, well, first and foremost, I think it's almost inevitable that you're going to face difficulties, which sounds really bad. But I think it's the truth. It's just that there's a lot of design jobs out there, but the competition is very steep. So I think it's very normal to have difficulties and it's okay. And I think everybody at certain point in their like path face difficulties, including me. I still face a lot of difficulties like as I'm, growing my career. So I think it's very natural, and I know it's very like hard to look at LinkedIn or even like YouTube or podcasts, and everybody has these amazing job or like they're like going at an expedited rate or a rate that you don't seem to quite match. And I think it's easy to feel down, but I would like to encourage people to like not feel down about that. And likewise, like I think we should if you're especially in your early in your career, I think you should be open to learning new things. Like if someone suggests you something, or if you find a certain tool that you think is really interesting or catches your attention, like go for it. I don't let anything really stop you, which is really cliche, but yeah, I would say just be very open to whatever opportunities that comes to you, and if something interests you, like don't doubt yourself, just learn it and see how you like it. And even if you fail, like that's totally fine. if you, as long as you had fun and you learned something, I think that's really important. Like I took coding class, I think like the first two times I didn't do very well. I actually got like a C, and like I think I was like one of the lowest, I had one of the lowest grade from all my other classmates, and I felt really bad about it when I was a student. But I had a lot of fun, and I saw a lot of potential in maybe like integrating it with my practice, and certainly like my perseverance, I guess, kind of paid off. I think like a lot of people, if they put a lot of effort, like, or if people took the same classes as I did, I'm pretty sure they can get a lot further. But I try to not compare myself by, you know, who learns it faster or better or writes code efficiently. As long as I'm having fun and, you know, creating and learning, I think that's something that we should always look forward to.
Yeah, definitely. I think you brought up a few really good points, like being patient with the journey because not everything's going to happen all at once. And while you compare yourself with others, know that not everyone started at the same time at the same place, right? It's really common to be struggling in the first couple of years, and even if you're 10, 15 years in, you'll still face a lot of obstacles. So that's the first thing is about the mindset, and then the second thing is about really keep improving, because if you don't improve, there's a reason why you can't get ahead, right? So I love how you mentioned open-mindedness and just be open to learning new things, instead of staying stagnant and then complaining about not getting hired. So let's actually shift gears a little bit and talk about what got you hired, especially your portfolio. It actually initially stood out to me, and that's why I reached out to you. So your portfolio is not like most portfolios that I have seen. It's really creative. It has a lot of fun elements in it, and you also created a playground section where you show a lot of your personal projects that are not necessarily work projects. So tell us, what do you think? How did you kind of ideate, right? Like, how did you come up with the idea for your portfolio, and and how important do you think it is to think outside of the box instead of sticking to a standard template for your
Yes,
portfolio?
I think that's an excellent question. I think for my portfolio, I kind of went back to my painting and my illustrative days. One of the things that my teachers taught me was like, you don't want to paint something and then have an artist look at it and say, I know exactly what technique he used, what paint he used, and what brush to use. Because that means that the medium itself is speaking for you, not the actual content. And like that kind of hit me in like a different way. I was like, oh yeah. So like if you're using like a very standard like color palette, like if you're using a lot of ultramarine blue and a lot of those like colors, like in oil painting, um, like if you have a bunch of phthalo blue like everywhere, then unless it's not done intentionally, like people are gonna like people who are just regular people, they are gonna see it and be like, that's a pretty blue painting, like I like it. But like to a designer, they're gonna be like, that is so phthalo, like I don't, I'm like kind of disgusted by it. Like, and I was like, wow, my teacher really hates phthalo blue. But then I think like over the course of the years, I realized like how blue the color phthalo blue is, which is why it's so useful. But it's also like as an underpainting element. But like if that compromises the whole painting, it becomes very jarring and becomes very distracting. So I think same thing with my portfolio. I understood that like my resume was not as like filled with experiences as the people I'm competing in with the entry level job, because nowadays like apparently two internship is like not enough to get an entry level jobs to certain companies. So I realized that like I gotta do something different. And I looked at my portfolio and I thought my content itself is okay, but I think the way I was presenting it was the issue. Because originally, which I don't have because it was a few years ago, I had like a my portfolio from Adobe, and it just had this like square like layout with like, and that was it. So I remember thinking like I'm getting I'm having my portfolio. I'm a designer. I like pride myself as being like a web designer, and yet like my portfolio itself kind of speaks to like template at most. And that kind of hit me like, oh my god, what if like a design manager, design hiring manager sees my website and think I he used Adobe Portfolio, like that doesn't interest me. So I it kind of came back in a full circle. So I kind of tasked myself to recode the website. I like tried various CMS tools. Also understood like the technical limitation and scalability. So I didn't want to code everything from scratch because there's just no way I can maintain that like as I progress into my career. And I didn't have the skills back then to code something with like barebone and code my own content management system. So I chose Webflow because it's kind of like website builders for people who are very familiar with CSS, and I really like that because then it was a graphical user interface approach to coding almost. So I took Webflow, and I also wanted to kind of sell the point that like I do know a little bit of coding, and my teacher, who wasn't directly involved in my website, has always taught me to like first impression is everything, whether that's just meeting a new client or like you're showing your portfolio, business cards, all these collaterals that are front facing about you is super important. So I think a translation to that to my website would be the hero section, above the fold, above the like whatever is within that 100% viewport height. That's the first impression. So I want to kind of create an element that really helps users identify who I am as like a person, my skills, uh, and so I kind of took it like I made a like fake code editor looking like interface using HTML and CSS and Webflow, and then the copywriting inside of it is very much like code. It like I want to sell the point that I'm like a multidisciplinary designer. So I had like this bracket, which is called an array of like different strings or different letters of the skills that I'm comfortable with, and then like that will kind of serve as like a navigation bar, and kind of like redefining like what a navigation bar could be, because like a lot of the portfolios that I saw had like the standard like horizontal like navigation bar with like the logo and the link, which is super great because like it's a familiar space, everybody can use it. But I wanted to kind of sell the point that like I wanted to, I am this like multidisciplinary or creative thinker. So I kind of made that little code editor looking graphic that served also as like a navigation bar.
Yeah. I I really love that. I think that's genius. Even if you don't know that much about code, you know a little bit about it. You understand what it is, and you kind of and also brought up a really good analogy with the painting, right? Um, Even if you haven't studied painting, I mean, when you appreciate something, you don't want it to be so predictable. You want to feel something, right? You want it to be special. When people custom order something, they pay a premium price because they want it to be one of a kind. They don't want it to be like off the shelf. So that's the same thing. And I'm glad you brought up Webflow, by the way. Actually, we also use Webflow for our portfolio school program, and it's actually really clean. It really generates code that's clean and also easy to use. You don't actually have to code if you don't want to, right? And it just makes it so much easier to break away from the template and actually realize what you design on a blank canvas, which is awesome. Excellent. So can you actually tell us a little bit about your projects? You can pick one or two. Tell us what you did and what inspired you to create the
Sure.
projects.
So one of the projects I'm currently working on is a personal project of mine, coming from like a more editorial background in my art college years. Um, I kind of learned a lot about like different eras of design and like different approach to design. So one of the things that I learned was Swiss design using their grid system, and I was just like, I didn't really like it at first because it kind of confines you into this like grid system, but I gained to really like it because it's really effective at what it's supposed to do. And then I also started learning HTML and CSS and learned that there is this property called CSS grid. And I saw so many overlaps and similarity between it. And I'm definitely not the first to like understand these overlaps. I like came across like when I typed Swiss grid and like CSS grid, like some people have wrote like articles about it. So I was like, oh, I want to make a poster generator that kind of like that allows you to generate like Swiss grid like layout posters, even if you're not a designer. So I coded everything in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's no backend yet, so it's just all through your browser cache and storage. But it was kind of like it kind of served a multiple function. One is to obviously like kind of satisfy my craving to like kind of showcase these overlaps in that exist in both print and CS coding. And then another was to kind of learn new coding techniques. So I obviously came through a lot of obstacles, being that I'm not a very good JavaScript coder. Uh, and my primary, like, I guess the language that I'm familiar with or the most proficient in is HTML, CSS, and like a JavaScript library called P5, which helps you create graphics. So it was kind of a challenge for me to like learn plain vanilla JavaScript and like Google my way out of like figuring things out because I didn't really have like a teacher or someone that I could ask. So asking, I would like go through a lot of Stack Overflows, Google to like learn new techniques, new tricks, so that I could add it to my tool belt. So I think that was like a really good project for me because it like serves so many functions or so many intentions, being that like it's a project that I can showcase to future employers. It's a project that I know that I could just share with my non-designer friends and see them interact, and it's really cool because like the feedback so far has been like relatively positive. So and they like are when I see them like click through it, like I can see their like eyes kind of glisten, and then I'm like, oh, I built that and designed that. Like it's something that I can take a lot of pride in, and I've learned so much from coding it. So it's a project that I really like.
That's amazing. So it's something that you can share with your friends who are not in design and kind of like see their reactions and also I remember teaching like the grid, right? And I think I should use your generator for my students. That would be really fun. I've been looking for like fun, interactive learning tools, and maybe this is it. And also, actually, personal projects are really a good icebreakers for interviews. When you go somewhere and they ask you about your projects, you can be like, well, before we break into the bigger projects, let me show you a fun little thing that I develop, and maybe you'll get a taste of what I can do, right? And also, I've always heard great things about P5. It's a great library, and some of my creative coding friends are actually really love it. And it's and obviously we all have to look up a lot of things as we learn. I remember myself learning WordPress many years ago, and I've never enrolled in a course or anything like that. I just looked through so many discussion threads and watched so many videos, and eventually it all came together. So I'm sure you went through the same process with your project, and it's so good to see it come to
Yeah,
life, right?
definitely. I mean,
Yeah. So yeah.
oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I
go
was gonna
ahead,
say
sorry.
it's so good to see it come to life, but I think the most satisfying part is when you inevitably encounter a bug or a state that you don't expect it to happen, and like you run around circles trying to figure out like where you went wrong, and then like you finally find it, and then when you click refresh and it like does the exact thing that you ask it to do, like I think that's so satisfying. Like debugging, super
Yes.
satisfying.
Yes. Yes, a huge sense of relief, and you feel so achieved because you actually solved a big problem. And maybe it's easy for some other people, but hey, you figured it out all on your own, and that's the most important thing. So speaking of technical stuff, I know you design your contact form in a really unconventional way. I mean, it's still a regular form, but you put something on it that just makes me chuckle. It makes me, smile. You said you love ducks. And I'm like, I've never seen this anywhere before. This is funny. I want to talk to this person, right? So, how do you, what do you think it's, is it important to incorporate humorous elements in your portfolio design? What inspired you to, be a little creative
Yeah,
about it?
I'm so glad you liked it. Thank you so much for your kind words.
I do. I've never seen anything like that before, which
Yeah,
is
I
really
would
fun.
say
Yeah.
with things that have a lot of voice and color, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Some people really like it, while some people are like, "Oh, I don't think this guy can work at a professional capacity." And I think that's kind of
Right.
bad because then maybe I lost a potential employer or potential client. But it's also kind of a like good thing because then you probably won't work well with that person anyways. So you just kind of avoid
Yes.
a
Exactly.
whole
Yeah.
like bad apples. So you only get to pick good apples. I guess that's the pros. And I also think, especially if you're trying to work in house or at a company, I think work culture is super important. And not to say that there's like one right way. It's differences are like apples and oranges, and it's really hard to find like a company that like you feel, I guess, like aligned to or feel like you fit in. So I think like companies are interviewing you not only for your technical abilities but also like your like working style or your work style in your workflow. So I think embedding personalities really show employers and interviewers like what you're like. So I think like throughout my copywriting and all my portfolio, I try to be relatively consistent. I'm not a copywriter by any means, but I do like have similar tone, which is a little bit more casual, because that's the type of work environment I like to work in. So if it's like super corporate, which is really funny because I would consider Microsoft to be super corporate,
Yeah.
but I was proven to be wrong because yeah, they're very
I know,
nice.
right?
They're very personable, like great work culture. I like really love my team. So yeah, I think it was super important for me to display my
That's
personality
awesome.
because then it started to kind of cherry pick or gain attention from people who were like minded, like me, who like working casually and working collaboratively. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that, yeah, and I completely agree. I used to say in one of my articles that you're not going to be for everyone, but you're going to be special for some people, right? And you don't want to work for everyone either, because some of them are just not going to click with you. So you might as well be yourself. If you pretend to be someone that you're not, you're going to suffer. So I'm really glad to hear that you actually found a great team, and even though it seems corporate, but it's not. And actually, a lot of companies are, depending on what team you're in, sometimes you'll find really supportive teams, sometimes not. So it's a matter of trial and error. Awesome. So my last question to you is, because you are, still just a couple of years out of school, so it may be still fresh in your memories. Was there anything that you learned in school back in the day that you don't use as much anymore? And what kind of skills do you think it's pretty important for designers to master in the
Yes,
workplace?
a lot. Art is a very broad topic, which means that you get, especially in an art school, you get to learn a variety of things, which is really great because a lot of the things that you learn have overlapping disciplines and principles. But it also means like the technical things that you learned or honed don't really get used in an everyday setting. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's useless or arbitrary. It just means that like it's just another skills that you have in your back pocket for that one time that you're going to need, or multiple times, or you can apply it in your own unique use case and then make it your own. And to kind of be more specific about that, it's like I, as an illustrator, spent so many years learning anatomy, how to draw hands, how to draw people's faces. And then I came into tech, and this is going to sound a little harsh, but like I realized that nobody was really drawing hands. Like everybody just had circles for hands, or like blobs with no like metacarpals.
Oh
Yes,
no.
all the like bone anatomy that I studied like for
Right.
2 years, like
Yeah.
it kind of turned out to be not so useful.
Yeah.
And I think I asked, like, I think it was like my second or third company, and I just kind of asked, like, why doesn't anybody draw hands in like tech? Is it just me? And then I kind of found out that like nobody liked drawing hands, so then they just chose not to draw hands. So I remember when I was
Mhm.
doing some of the,
Oh, is that the reason?
I think so. And I mean, like, it's not like an official statement.
I think it yeah, it may also be like because it's so difficult, not a lot of people know how to draw it well. So they're like, yeah, let's just scratch it because we can create a whole new style of illustration
Yes.
without the hand, right? So
Yeah, it
it
could
could
be
be
that
that.
too.
Yeah.
It could be as intentional as like making a brand that is easy to use and easy to recreate. Um, yeah, so I remember like I was like, why was my professor so like fixated on hands? And like I remember that being like just kind of like, oh, I guess I didn't really need to spend 2 years to like learn how to draw an anatomically perfect hand. But like it's really helpful
Mhm.
too because like someday I'm gonna like I have drawn hands a lot as an illustrator, so it still comes,
Mhm.
but I'm like, okay, it's
Yeah.
not as important as some of my illustrator teacher has made it to be. And that might also be because I work in tech and
Yeah.
UX and they work in editorial. Like our field of work is relatively different, even though we're both illustrating. So yeah, I think that's like one thing that like I spend so much time on that don't get used a lot. And there's like other things too, like painting. I don't get to do as a career, but I like see a lot of design disciplines that are used in painting that apply to almost everything I do. Like painting is basically like a whole experience, like but just on a static canvas, and you're using design principles to control the user's eye so that it tells a narrative. And I think similarly, UX does the exact same thing. It's just you have multiple screens, but it's ultimately like one product, like one experience, and you're ultimately telling a narrative with like a story, like
Exactly.
it's a beginning to an end. So like on a nuance level, they're like very
Mhm.
identical, I would say, but like obviously on a technical level, there's a lot of things that are different. So understanding those like bigger picture has been very helpful for me to like learn new things. Because then like for UX design, like I like learned that the ultimate goal here is to get user from point A to point B. And in illustration, you learn that like, especially in editorial illustration, which is what Micah is known for, it's basically like telling a story of like the article that it's featuring in. So you need to like employ a lot of like different design disciplines like compositions, color, scale to like make sure that the story is being told like, from point A to point B.
Yeah, I think you brought up so many good points because no matter what kind of projects or disciplines that you're designing for, you all need the foundational skills, right? Which you have been trained for, even though they may seem irrelevant in a specific project. But like you said, it actually shows at the level that you're on, and you'll see that difference, with someone who hasn't been trained in those, and also design skills are kind of transferable to other adjacent disciplines, right? Because you study one thing, it makes it easier for you to kind of do another discipline. And you also mentioned storytelling, even though it seems like it's more relevant for editorial, but it actually is super relevant for UX as well, and many other design disciplines. If you can't tell a story, you can't relate to your users, who are human beings, right? Who inherently loves stories, and designers should know how to, even if we're not writers, we're not producers, but we need to understand that psychology. So that's really amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing so many valuable advice with us today, and we look forward to seeing more of your work in the future. And I have no doubt that you'll do really great in this field. So thank you so
Oh,
much for
thank you for
coming
having
today.
me. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, so if you want to hear more from us, if you want to hear more inspiring designers, creatives like Samuel, please stay tuned to us. We update every week, and we'll see you again very soon.